Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of the Biodiversity Podcast by Teasels. And today I'm joined by Richard Bunting of Rewilding Britain. Hi, Richard. How you doing?
Hey, Dan. Morning. Good, thank you. And yeah, great to be here. Thanks.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So, Richard, you're from Rewilding Britain. It's an organisation I've been aware of for some time now. But do you want to give a bit of background on yourself and how you became involved with Rewilding Britain?
Well, my day job is working as a consultant with various environmental and rewilding charities. I've been working with Trees for Life in the Highlands of Scotland, which is a rewilding charity since 2007. Rewilding sort of really taken off, I think, in the last 10 years, something like that. And largely, a lot of it was kickstarted after George Monbiot's book, Feral, came out. Soon after that, Rewilding Britain was set up, and I joined the team 3 years ago or so. So, you know, I'm in a fortunate position, really, because I'm working with some really brilliant organisations. Rewilding Britain and Trees for Life. I do some work with another charity in Scotland called Scotland The Big Picture, and we have something up there too on the north side of the England-Scottish border called the Scottish Rewilding Alliance, which is about 20 different, well, it's over 20 different environmental organisations and green organisations. So I do communications work and media work and act as a spokesperson for these organisations, and I you know, that is a really fortunate thing to be able to do. I'm really proud of it because I think rewilding is a really exciting new approach to tackling the nature and the climate crisis and creating benefits for people. So I can talk about that and a bit more, as you like, Dan.
Yeah.
Alongside, sorry,
you are perfectly placed because again, you know, you seem to live rewilding in many guises under many different titles, but let's just, you've probably been asked this question a million billion times, but what is your definition? What is your definition of rewilding? Because I'd like to get at least a sort of a semi line in the sand when it comes to that phrase, because as you're probably aware, it's been bastardized as a term, really, hasn't it? And it would be nice to know where you see rewilding.
Well, I'll tell you what I think rewilding is, and then I'll give you a definition, if that's all right. Well, I think, to me, rewilding it's hope. It's hope for tackling the overlapping nature and climate emergencies, and it offers opportunities for creating a cascade of benefits for people at the same time. So to my mind, it's win-win-win. That's not to say it's not without its challenges, and we can talk about those a bit, and it isn't a silver lining to those challenges, to those big threats either, but it really does offer hope for making a big change. And we do have a definition. It's the large-scale restoration of nature to the point that nature can look after itself again. So this is about repairing ecosystems. It's about restoring biodiversity. It offers the opportunity for reversing the collapses we've seen in biodiversity rather than just holding the line. And it does bring with it a whole range of other benefits. And at its heart, it's about restoring natural processes. It's about helping nature to get back on its feet so that nature can do what it does so well and has done for millennia, but is struggling because of human activity. And I guess too, you know, this is about working with nature, not working against nature.
Yeah. And I guess what we've seen so far at I guess the sort of not the pinnacle, but the rewilding site that's got most press over the last 10 15 years is NEP, where you've had the real restoration of is it 4,000 acres, 5,000 acres, and now very much so it's very much looking after itself there.
Well, I mean, NEP has really led the way as a pioneering rewilding site, and there's no doubt about that. And what has been achieved at NEP, the NEP Castle Estate in Suffolk, is absolutely being a pioneering rewilding project. So it's captured really eloquently in a book called Rewilding by Isabella Tree. Well worth a read if you haven't read that book. And by changing their approach to how they manage the estate, by giving nature space and time to get itself working again. It's been absolutely stunning to see how that habitat restoration, how that return of natural processes has had knock-on effects for a wide range of species and for the biodiversity on the site, you know, from purple emperor butterflies to nightingales. You know, it's a beautiful story, it's an inspiration, and people can actually go and visit NET. They do wildlife safari tours. So, you know, well worth it to see rewilding in action. And, you know, I think what we're seeing now is a real blossoming of rewilding projects all over the UK. So Rewilding Britain has set up a rewilding network. We don't run practical rewilding projects ourselves, but what we do is provide support and expertise to other projects. And there are now nearly 900 projects of different sizes within the rewilding network. We're only about a year and a half in, and people are sort of knocking on the door to join. And what's
Say that
also,
again.
there's nearly 900 projects have joined. So some of those are small, some of those are big. If you go on our website, you'll see the big one. We have a map with the big one. So all of those are 100 acres and more. So these are big sites. And there's something like 200 of the bigger sites. And then you bring in the others, the small holdings, the farms, community projects. We're looking at 900 or so already. And the Rewilding Network was only set up in early 2021. So it's already exceeded our expectations. And, you know, one of the reasons we set up the Rewilding Network, because there was clearly a demand. People were coming to Rewilding Britain, asking for advice, asking for support. And it was an interesting flip of the dynamic, if you like, because 3 or 4 years ago, we were going out to landowners to try and encourage them to rewild, and something happened. Rewilding somehow got more into the zeitgeist, and the landowners and the land managers started coming to us. So there's a real demand. And we were talking about NET, but I think you speak to a lot of the landowners and managers. A lot of them have been really inspired by what's happening at NET. So yeah, it's an inspiration, but it's a pioneer, and but it's, you know, it's no longer alone at all.
So a couple of things there. So you mentioned that, you know, the landowners were coming to you. So where do you feel how can I put this? Where do you feel is where does their motivation come from? Because some people, maybe one would assume, they're coming from a place from their heart, and they want to do, you know, they want to do right by the land. They want to leave a better world for their children, etc., etc. But are there any other motivations that are, you know, are they getting people to pick up the phone and speak to you and say, look, we want to change the way we use our land? You know, where are their motivations coming from?
I think the best way of answering that is to talk about diversity. And when I'm talking about diversity, I'm talking about diversity of the owners and the managers of the rewilding projects, but also the diversity of the type of project. So if you look at the owners and the managers, there's a wide range. There are some brilliant community projects bubbling up, and often in those cases, people are going to be driven by a desire to fix the planet, but also to help people. So it's about biodiversity and climate change, but also often it's about trying to create community benefits, for example, for the local economies. If you look at a farm, or there are big farms and small farms, there are also big estates involved in rewilding, and often, sometimes for those, there's an economic driver as well as a desire to do the right thing in terms of nature, because people have got to make a living. So these are farms that are saying, well, I don't want to be adding to the problems that the natural world's facing. I would like to be part of the solution, but equally, I have to make a living on my farm. So how can I diversify? And very often in those cases, what we find is the farms are continuing to farm traditionally and to produce food, but they're looking at their marginal land and their unproductive land and thinking, well, okay, there are opportunities here to restore nature, which is a fantastic end in itself. But equally, some of them are finding diversification opportunities. So on that note, Rewilding Britain has a rolling study in place, and it's looked at some 50 of the big rewilding projects and the ones that are on, including ones that are on farms. And what we've found so far is a 65% increase in full-time equivalent jobs since rewilding began. And the explosion of volunteering opportunities is bigger. I can't remember. It's a huge number of volunteering opportunities. So it's because these projects are starting to look at opportunities like nature-based tourism or camping and glamping, recreation opportunities, ecological monitoring opportunities. There's a range of things that are happening. So I think the motivations vary. You know, if it's a charity running a site, it's driven by the charity's vision and mission. If the National Trust or the RSPB or Trees for Life, this community is slightly different. The landowners have got a slightly different take, but ultimately, I think the overall approach is you know, the end goal is very much the same. The motivations might vary. I think the other diverse point I was trying to make was, and I've kind of touched on this, I think, in that answer, the nature of the sites. So I go into Rewilding Britain's web pages for the Rewilding Network, and I think it's a tour of hope. It gives me a real lift because it's you look at this wide range of different projects, different sizes, different types. But again, I think it touches on the motivations because, you know, some of them might be native woodland restoration projects. Others might be coastal restoration projects, you know, because the people there and those teams are really motivated about the dire state of our seas and marine life and the challenges that marine life faces. You know, other projects might be urban projects. So there's a very big project starting in Derby at Allestree Park, which is Britain's biggest urban project. And the Mayor of London has also started a rewilding task force, bringing in a bunch of experts, including Rewilding Britain's director, Alistair Driver, to look at how London can play its part in restoring nature. So when you take it in the round and you look at this exciting range of owners and managers and the exciting range of projects that are underway, you know, clearly you've got different motivations to work, but ultimately, you know, end of the day, it's extreme. It's hope in action.
So I want to stick on because I was unaware of the Mayor of London trying to set up a rewilding task force. Is there anything to report on that? Because I spend quite a bit of time in London. And I think there is great opportunities. You've got the London parks. You've got a absolutely massive green roof networks, especially in this the centre of the city of London. Can you report on anything on that task force at the moment, or?
It's fairly early days for what's happening in London, and I think the discussions are still unfolding. But you know, there are some sort of plans in place, which would include native tree planting, for example, and establishing wildlife corridors. And I think as well, kind of looking at the quality of kind of rivers and wetlands and different corners and pockets of the capital where there's real opportunity to take action for nature. I think, you know, when you look at it more broadly too, a lot of our urban places are struggling with these issues, and I think I'm bouncing off the point slightly here, but I think one of the issues we face as a nation is a very neat and tidy mentality. Much of it's born of a Victorian attitude towards managing nature, and that percolates across urban and, to be honest, rural settings right across the country, and it's one of the big challenges. I'm sort of mentioning this now because I think that there are all sorts of opportunities for different towns and cities and local councils to look at, whether you call it rewilding, whether you call it nature restoration or wilding or renaturing, doesn't really matter. The trajectory is the same, and there are opportunities for councils to be restoring nature and bringing nature back into our lives, which is really important because we all depend on nature. We depend on it for every mouthful of food we take, every lungful of air we breathe, but also for our health and well-being. And often it's just about not doing the harmful stuff, taking your hands off the wheel a little bit and letting nature thrive, and being willing to for areas where appropriate to be a little bit scruffier and a bit wilder, and for nature to do its thing. So, you know, often we just don't give the natural world a chance. So you end up with for example, miles and miles and miles of road verges where visibility for drivers is not an issue,
Yeah.
where councils spend taxpayers' money to go and mow the life out these road verges. Often they're havens for wildflowers that are rapidly disappearing.
Yes.
And if you bring the wildflowers back, you help pollinating insects, and you help the birds, and you help other invertebrates. And so some of that is just about a shift of approach. And I think we're still in a place where, as well, a lot of councils get pressure from local people to be neat and tidy, but councils are well able to explain why they're taking a different management approach. And I've been discussing this with my local council, which mowed a beautiful wildflower meadow they allowed to thrive around a local leisure centre. But if you get it right and explain to people, and maybe mow around the edges and have some paths, and you can explain what you're doing and why, then you can start winning the argument and winning people, you're winning hearts and minds. But councils need to be willing to do that. They'll save themselves a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of taxpayers' money by doing so.
So again, I want to stick on that as well, because you've got approximately 900 rewilding sites that are linked to Rewilding Britain. Can you give us any, obviously the opportunities are apparent, and we'll talk about that much more later on in the podcast. And I'm acutely aware of all the benefits, but on a wider scale, what sort of challenges do you have? I'm conscious, you mentioned about the pressure from the Neat and Tidy Brigade, but what other challenges do you hear anecdotally from other rewilding sites? Both large and small.
I think the most serious challenges, though I think we're getting beyond them, are born of myths. They're born of myths about or misunderstandings about what rewilding's about. So an example of that would be we occasionally get the media suggesting that rewilding is about bringing back apex predators. Now, so rewilding is about restoring habitats, and it is about restoring missing native species when the time's right and when it makes sense. And you always, whenever you reintroduce a species, you go through a proper process. You ensure the habitat's there, you ensure a proper public consultation, and you don't get a government reintroduction license for any species until you've done all that. And it's a long, painstaking process. But occasionally there's this shorthand that it's about wolves, and when in fact, in Scotland, when in fact wolves aren't going to be coming back anytime soon.
So I've got to stick on that. So where you've been working in PR and media, where does that come from? Is it just lazy journalists just sort of doing a 10-minute Google search, seeing that they've reintroduced wolves in Yellowstone, and therefore they're extrapolating that, and that's it? I mean, where does that come from? I'm really curious about that.
Largely, so I wouldn't claim it. None of it has come from advocates within the conservation environmental movement over the years, because it might have done. But equally, I think often you do run into slightly lazy journalism in short term, that they don't really look into what rewilding is. But I do think we're moving beyond this now. I mean, this was an issue 3, 4, 5 years ago. But the other worrying part of this is that there are some opponents of rewilding who oppose rewilding for their own reasons. Often it's at the moment, a lot of the pushback comes from, they'll say they're not opposed, but they do apply a lot of pushback. You're looking at organizations like the NFU, the big farming union, because they haven't really taken the time to fully embrace or understand rewilding and how it can work with farmers. And so sometimes their representatives regurgitate these myths, and it's really unhelpful. Now, whether they're doing it deliberately or not, I don't know. Because we do run into one of the other myths. There's a couple of others. I mean, one is that it's not about people, and another is, we've got to keep producing food, and we've got to keep the nation fed. Well, actually, you know what? We all like to eat. I like to eat. I'm a rewilding advocate. I quite like food too, and I quite like there to be food security for my children going forward. And the upshot of all that is, you can produce food while rewilding too. And when you look at the numbers, it blows the argument out of the water, because 70% of Britain is given over to agriculture. Something like 1% is currently rewilding. So this is like, is it David and Goliath, or is it an elephant and a mouse? I don't know. But 70% of the country is given up to agriculture. So the issues are really, have we got food security? And if there are challenges, what are they? Let's focus on the real challenges, like the fact, supermarkets don't always give farmers a fair deal. They reject food if it isn't quite the right shape. We've got vast food waste in this country. But the rewilding's happening on 1%. And when it is on farms, it's often on the marginal land. And we also need to remember it isn't just about farms. It's also about all these other precious habitats that are in a terrible state. So native woodlands, peatlands, wetlands, river systems, coastal areas, heaths, moorlands. We could rewild at least 5% of the country, maybe up to 30% of the country without using any productive farmland. So there's this is one of the challenges, and the other myth is about people. That somehow it's about people-less landscapes. Now, it might be in Australia or North America.
Where is the bloody evidence? Sorry, where is the bloody evidence for that? It's almost like
Well, it's not there because it's not true. It's about rewilding's about people. It's in our country, in Britain's a small island, and we don't have those big open spaces. And anyway, all the big rewilding charities want to make rewilding work for people and for local communities and economies. And if we achieve that, you are getting these multiple wins. And people are part of nature too, so that's really important to remember. But all the big charities, look at what the work Trees for Life's doing, the work Rewilding Britain's doing, and all the projects in the network. Scotland, the big picture. It's nature, it's climate, and it's people. And you need people to make rewilding happen, but you want people to benefit from rewilding, and that's eminently possible. And I think I touched on it earlier in our conversation, but the benefits of people are really broad. From health and well-being, from that feel-good feeling you get from being out in nature. Doctors are starting to prescribe getting out into the natural world for issues like depression, for example.
Yes.
But there's also other social benefits and cultural benefits and benefits to local economies. You can have nature-based local economies creating new opportunities, especially for rural and coastal areas, which are often amongst the most disadvantaged in the country.
Yeah. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about Wild Ken Hill. As you're talking, I'm thinking about, well, it's obvious how NEP's grown. You think about, on a normal sort of farm, you may employ what, 2 people, I don't know, 3 people, just to run a tractor. Or they may be people subletting the land. But you see, even in the time I've known about Wild Ken Hill, that a rewilding site close to where I am in Cambridge. Was it it's where I met Alistair. Where I met Alistair, we're at the Gathering Festival,
At Wild Ken Hill.
Yeah.
They're doing amazing stuff at Wild Ken Hill, and and again, they're showing really clearly how it comes back to the conversations I was just having about it's about people, and it's about producing food alongside conservation and rewilding. And of course, the BBC Spring Watch have been using Wild Ken Hill as one of their host sites for the last year or two, which has been great to see. There's an array of fantastic habitats and all sorts of wonderful species starting to thrive at Wild Ken Hill. And something I was saying earlier, rewilding is a relatively new approach. It's been around, it's been discussed since the 90s. It's gone up a gear in Britain over the last decade, but now what we're seeing is more and more projects coming online, and we're building up more and more data about how it works, what some of the challenges are, but what the benefits are, and how we can. That's partly what the Rewilding Network's about. That's run by Rewilding Britain. It's about people coming together as a community and sharing ideas and what works well, what doesn't work so well, how can we improve, and how can we take things forwards.
And then, so like we touched on earlier, so you're involved with quite a few, rewilding projects up in Scotland. I'm really curious, actually, because there seems to be like you said, but with the Alliance, there seems to be a massively expanding group of people that are wanting to rewild estates. I think that perhaps they can see that sort of, you know, the old style of managing a estate for shooting is its days are numbered. Is that where you see that?
So I think probably yes. When you talk about the intensive shooting, the intensive management of grouse moors for shooting is extremely damaging for nature and for the climate. You know, the moors are burnt to create new heather shoots for grouse, so that people can go out in an unsustainable way and kill large numbers of grouse. There's other less intensive ways of running a grouse moor. There's a thing called walked up grouse moor, which is a lot less intensive, and it's the intensive approach that's really the big problem. And you know, ultimately, these days may end up becoming numbered because it's not always economically viable either. It's a recreation activity for a small number of people, and it doesn't always pay the bills very well, and it doesn't employ a lot of people either.
Yeah.
If you take one example, a project I've been really proud to have done a lot of work on in Dumfries and Galloway, at a place called Langholm Moor outside the town of Langholm, and you might have heard of this project. It's made a lot of headlines because the community there set out to raise a lot of money to buy a lot of land. So the Duke of Buccleuch is one of Scotland's biggest landowners. Decided the Buccleuch estates decided they were going to sell a large area of their border estates, and that included 10,000 acres outside Langholm. And the local community has always traditionally seen this land as theirs, culturally theirs, but it's never been sold before.
Okay.
They about 2019, the Buccleuch announced they would sell the land. The community got together and created a well thought through business plan and feasibility study. I mentioned this partly because it's a former grouse moor, and it's the site of a famous study. And one of the top line takeaways from that study was the intensive grouse shooting was no longer economically viable. And soon after that, the Buccleuch decided they were going to sell the land. And they decided they were going to do something that, in hindsight, was probably a wee bit bonkers, but it was hugely inspiring. And so I got involved on a voluntary level when I heard about it. They decided they were going to raise £6 million to buy 10,000 acres of land to create a new nature reserve called the Tarras Valley Nature Reserve. And that would bring new life to this moorland. It would tackle the nature crisis, it would tackle climate breakdown, and it would hopefully help regenerate the community, which has seen better days economically because it's a former textile mill town, but a lot of the mills, almost all the mills really, have now gone. The industry's had a major decline. So the community got together and then
as a result, sorry about that. Just so, you know, the textile industry's declined, and as a result, people have probably just moved away from the area, moved towards the cities for employment. So it's becoming de-peopled.
Yes, because the town's facing a lot of the problems a lot of rural areas of Scotland are facing. So you end up with an aging population, the migration of youth away from the area, for example, and challenges like that. So absolutely, and I think for me, again, I'd say one of the great things about rewilding is it offers opportunities for people.
Yeah.
Just stepping away from Langholm a moment. So, well, just to say, the Langholm story was a big success. They raised the £6 million over the 3 years somehow. Apart the generosity of a lot of people around the world through a public crowdfunder and big donors, and now there is this new 10,000 acre nature reserve. And to go back to something you were saying just now, though, Dan, the jobs on the moor have gone from 0 to 6 already. That's 6 full-time jobs in a year, and there are now the second section of the land has only just been purchased. The legal detail hasn't been completed yet. So within months, the nature reserve is going to double from 5,000 acres to 10,000 acres officially. But we've already got 6 new jobs, and there's all of these exciting plans in place for nature-based tourism, through to dark skies, through to camping and glamping and walking trails. And so we'll see what unfolds. But I think they're just like NEP is showing, you can make rewilding pay economically with a nature-based approach to benefit the local community.
And we
I
can't
was going.
underestimate that. That's potentially six families that are being supported.
It's really important, it's inspiring for everybody else as well, because this is going to be a beautiful corner of Dumfries and Galloway that doesn't get a lot of tourism, but if they get it right, it's done in a sustainable, managed way. It will open up this corner of Scotland that's a hidden gem, to allow people, nature lovers, for example, to go and just immerse themselves in this beautiful part of the world.